Antoni, thank you again for this conversation. I'll start with obviously the overview of this season, and if you'll permit, or at least humor me a little bit, an analogy that it's a personal analogy for me, but I think it's relevant to the threads that are running through this season. And here's where I'm going with this. A few years ago, I tore my Achilles playing basketball, which is as painful as it sounds, and it was a
Yeah.
long sort of recovery process. And you do all of these little physiotherapy things so that you can trust your foot again and you can trust that tendon again. It wasn't until I rolled my ankle on that same leg and that ankle healed that I actually believe and commit to, oh no, I think my tendon's fine now. So I know that's a bit of a left field analogy, but when I look at the season for Stratford this year, same sort of logic comes to mind that obviously the pandemic was this massive tear, was this massive injury to theater, but also just the performing arts at any place that required a live performance. And for a couple of years after, you know, it was no longer a pandemic, I think a lot of people played it safe in terms of what was staged, stayed away from conflict, stayed away from pain, entertained passion, but in a very sort of confined way. But this season at Stratford seems to profess that, no, we are healed, we are healing, and we're coming back at it. Does all of this make any sense to you, or am I completely out of my
No, you put your finger right on it because as I was looking at the plays I was attracted to at this moment in human history, I realized they all have conflict in them, like a lot of conflict, war. And I was a bit worried about that, Michael. I thought, oh, does anybody really need that at this moment? Do they need to, in this moment of international conflicts of every kind, whether it's, financial or actual hot wars, do we need to go to the theater for that? And I realized as I thought more about it, I thought, no, the theater is the place where we work that stuff out, where we see it on the stage, we see the conflict on the stage in front of us, and we see the resolution. And I began with Ransacking Troy, the new play that Aaron Shields has written about, the Trojan War. And we always hear about the Greek and Trojan heroes. Well, here we hear about their wives and their significant others and the women in their lives and who take matters into their own hands and go to Troy and solve the problems and then come back. So it covers both the Odyssey and the Iliad and in a new retelling, which is delightful. And as I was reading that, I thought I noticed all the gods and goddesses in the who are very human. And wars and conflicts happen for all sorts of really petty, stupid reasons, and yet they happen. And I thought, you know what? These ancient stories, they have something to tell us today because we try to find all sorts of reasons as to why economically and interest driven, we come to, and then you begin to realize, no, it just takes a little bit of being human to pit people against each other. And it takes extraordinary humans to find a way through so that we heal and I realized that each one of the three Shakespeare plays had gods and goddesses in them, as Apollo in The Winter's Tale, and the presence in those plays also kind of guide human affairs. So I put together a playbill which is about war, like the art of war, and these Shakespeare plays. There's a lot of orphans in this playbill, in both Annie and there's orphans in each one of the three Shakespeares as well. There's a bit hidden under the surface, but I realized that orphans are the product of conflict and they test our humanity because, people can walk away from them. They don't have to take care of them. They don't have parents. And yet who are we if we do that? So the season is about those things, but I think that it focuses on solutions and finding harmony rather than dwelling in just the pain of it all.
All right, to that end, let's take a few sort of light swims throughout the season, and we'll start where you've just ended, the Shakespearean trio, and we'll start specifically with The Winter's Tale, which you are directing. It opens May 30th at the Tom Patterson Theater. What's the one thing about this production that excites you the most? And I ask that so that I can get away with the question I really want to ask is, what's the one thing that frustrates you the most about this story creatively speaking?
Okay, well, the cast is fantastic. They're a great group of actors, and if there's one thing that really has me jazzed, it's working with them. The discoveries we've made in the hall, their willingness to go to dark corners and to find the humanity of that has been fantastic. The frustrating thing about The Winter's Tale is also its chief kind of differentiator, its virtue, which is that it's all over the place. I mean, this is about a domestic situation, which is the kind of thing which fills, women's shelters. It's a jealous husband who becomes extremely difficult, abusive, and it's the resolution of that story. It's the second chance for that family to come back together. But we also travel to Bohemia, where it's full of dances and songs and just, and so it really tests the ability of a creative team to create cohesion, because Shakespeare late in his life embarked on this experiment, this wonderful, mad play. I'm just grateful there were no dramaturgs when Shakespeare was writing, because they'd say, you can't do that, but he does.
In this trio of Shakespearean dramas is obviously Macbeth, which opens on May 28th, and it's directed by Robert Lepage. I've been, trying to find as much as I about this as I can, but the one thing that I keep getting stuck on, just because it's interesting, is a photo of a row of motorcycles lined up, and I think that's just a very Robert Lepage thing. So it's that photo is obviously taken from a scene in this production, and the only note I have for this is motorcycles. Macbeth meets Bruce Springsteen? Question mark. How far off is that summary? Is this like a Springsteen version of Macbeth?
Well, the motorcycles are very present. It's about the biker wars in Quebec. And Robert does explicit research, and he comes up with like Lennox is a character in Macbeth, and Lennoxville was the site of these biker wars. And so the bike badges, like all the regalia, all of the kind of, strata, the military strata within these biker gangs that were fighting for each other, is used here to create the world of Macbeth. So he is adopting that language, that argot, those values, and showing these two warring gangs. And he's got fantastic actors. So the Shakespeare will be comme il faut, as they say in Quebec. I attended a workshop in Quebec City, and Michael, it was really, really beautiful. The images he's created on that stage. And yes, there are bikes that, that we've converted. We've created these great Harley Davidson machines out of electric motors, so that they sound, they've got speakers in them, they go sound like big hogs, but they are actually, like scooters. So I shouldn't give away all the secrets, but it's really, really a beautiful, beautiful piece.
And then you've got As You Like It opening May 26th, also at the Festival Theater. And I read the little synopsis on your website and had quite a laugh, because it reads, "Harvests grown thin and the world is out of joint." And I, for some reason, read that as "the world is out of joints." And I'm like, wow, this production is really pushing. So that's, of course,
Crisis. Yeah.
but actually, what I do want to talk about, and you probably get asked this quite a lot, it's beautiful to see how diverse this cast is. Two Black actors at the top of the bill. And we want to live in a world where you see Black actors in Shakespearean plays and you don't even think twice about it. It's boring to talk about and it's not really that interesting. But we don't live in that world yet, right? We still live in a world where, people struggle to see that to a certain degree. And also these Black actors struggle to find themselves on that stage for various reasons. So I guess, just from your perspective, I know you're not a casting director, but as an artistic director, how do you balance both the novelty of diverse faces in Shakespeare with the historical profile of certain roles, right? So as roles age as much as Shakespearean roles do, they gather this kind of like just massive profile of what it can and should be. And then there's this third thing that I'm sure is centered to your mind as well, of like the social mission of just having more diverse faces. These are three sort of warring factions when it comes to casting. Is there one that you start the conversation with, or is your job to sort of maintain the balance of all of those three?
You want diversity in your casting because you want the best talent. So that, you're trying to find extraordinary people. And we've been successful in doing that in each of these plays, whether it's Macbeth or Winter's Tale or As You Like It. They're fantastic actors, like Andre Stills, for instance, who would play Coriolanus and Robert's Coriolanus a couple of years ago, who's playing Polixenes in Winter's Tale, and as the assistant director as well as being a critical part of the Macbeth team. And we've got Christopher Allen, among others, in As You Like It. Um, it's important to find talented people. It's important that we look beyond the superficial and into the heart of these performers. And I would say over the years, we have more and more diversity on the stage and behind the stage too. That's critically important. Design teams and the marketing teams everywhere. And this is about the future. This is about now. So it's about connecting audiences with audiences today, Michael, and it's about building a relationship with those audiences and communities for the future. So, yes, diversity and the quality of talent on our stages that is made possible by a diverse company of artists is critical to the festival and to quality work.
There are three plays that really dive into what we talked about earlier in terms of like temporary conflict. So I've grouped them together, and they are Forgiveness, which opens June 18th at Tom Patterson. Ransacking Troy, which you mentioned earlier, opens August 21st as well. And then The Art of War, which opens on the 20th at Studio Theater. Forgiveness in particular seems to be the thread that ties it all together, both this season, but also this trio of sort of conflict-ridden plays. Why is it that both in terms of the production and also the moral lesson, that forgiveness seems to be that fulcrum?
And it's there throughout, like, for instance, Winter's Tale is about second chances. And we have Stephen Greenblatt coming this year, who is an internationally renowned Shakespeare scholar. He just wrote a book called Second Chances, Shakespeare and Freud. And it features a lot about the Winter's Tale. You only get a second chance if you can forgive, if you can get beyond what went wrong in that first chance. And we need second chances. As people, we screw up. We just do. You do your best and you don't get everything right. And sometimes you get some things really wrong. Because we're all human, we need to allow ourselves to try again. We need the humility to admit when we're wrong, and we need to try to do things differently. That being said, those are pretty kind of aspirational ideas. The reality is humanity, as we're seeing at this moment in time, continues to, walk down paths that have been proven to be difficult before. Forgiveness is a play based on the Mark Sakamoto book about his family, his background, about it takes place both in a Japanese prisoner of war camp and also on a farm in Alberta where Japanese Canadians have been placed into, basically working for nothing. And they were placed there during the Second World War. The inhumanity that was evident in both situations were the product of war. And we're lying to ourselves to say we won't do that again if war were to happen. And yet we have to find a way to not be defined by the past and to forgive each other. And so The Art of War by Yvette Nolan, phenomenal writer, is about artists going into the theater of war and trying to capture the madness, not just the way it might look in a photograph, but what it feels like. How to, help us understand what those soldiers are going through. So these different plays are connected, and they're connected by that thread of what really happened, not shying away from the difficulties and the horror of it, but then trying to find a way to do it differently if it were ever to happen again. That's a tall order, but the great thing about theater is that you get to watch terrible things happen, but do it safely and do it in a way where it's a jungle gym for the mind, where we get to envision other outcomes. And so that's kind of critical. That's especially now.
I just want to touch on ransacking Troy because it's such an interesting concept, but it's one that reminds me of Lysistrata, right? Which, women in Athens use celibacy as a tool of protesting war. But in this case, they're replacing celibacy with, I think, literal arms and going to war themselves. I don't want to ruin it because I don't think I'm able to ruin it. I'm not intimately familiar with the plot, but that's what it sounds like at the surface level. And obviously, Athens is switched with, I believe, somewhere else in Greece, in Greece.
Yeah.
So what this is also a commission by Stratford Theater with Erin Shields. What were some of the conversations that happened at the genesis of this commission that then led to where we are now?
Well, Erin was interested. She had done an adaptation of Paradise Lost for us about 8, 10 years ago. And the results of that were fantastic. It was witty and it did a beautiful kind of job of looking at the source material and being able to bring it into a modern vernacular and condensing that dense piece into, a few hours on the stage. The ambition here is madness. I mean, both the Odyssey and the Iliad, we're talking about huge books and stories that are at the bedrock of, the human experience, or at least the Western human experience. And Aaron wanted to retell these stories and find different solutions for the problems. So the male warrior idea is that you go there and you fight and you fight and you fight and you fight and you do it for 10 years. And then something really horrible happens and it's over. And then you try to find your way home and you try to find your way back to a normal life. What she had was envisioning is a world in which the women close to those warriors say enough's enough. And they go there and they use not so much weapons as guile, as talking to people, as finding other solutions for the problems. It's hilarious. It's delightful and it's eye-opening. And these women solve all the issues that are presented to them, both in Troy and also on the way back. But it would be too I don't want to spoil the ending. Let's just say that the men managed to get back in there somehow and complicate the ending. So it's about, maybe women have a viewpoint. Maybe women have a way of approaching things that might actually serve better and more successfully in many situations in life. Why don't we give them a chance?
And speaking of fierce women and of Green Gables, as we get into three plays that I've sort of chunked together as because there's Anne of Green Gables and there's Annie, and then there's Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, which
Yes.
doesn't have an Anne in it, but I'll see if I can get away with this. The photographer of a lot of the first rehearsals, the photos from the first rehearsals, her name's Anne Bagley, so mission accomplished. Back to Anne of Green Gables. This is a world premiere. It's also a Stratford Festival commission. I think something that is significant about in the background of these three works is last year, so Stratford 2024, 40,000 students from across 500 schools attended performances at Stratford. That's incredible. And, there are many reasons. I'm sure, it takes the whole village to make something like that happen. But one of the reasons why that happened is Something Rotten, which just seems to connect with both a younger audience, a family-friendly audience, but also that sort of like high school to end of university group of people in a way that I think was really successful and maybe is at the heart of some of the things that we're seeing here. So with Anne and Green Gables in particular, what was that journey to bring this to stage? And what similarities do you see between Avonlea and Stratford, if any?
Well, this iconic story about this, little girl who feels out of place, feels marginalized, is never accepted as an orphan. And she wins hearts all around her. Her practicality, her Lucy Maud Montgomery wrote a character who triumphs because she rolls up her sleeves and does it with great acceptance and love and won't settle for second place. She, and so Kat Sandler, who has written beautiful, touchy plays, funny plays, I felt would have a real kind of insight into this, and especially writes wonderful female characters. And so Kat undertook this, and her love of the source material, and it led to just these terrific readings that were both funny and also very moving. So we were there, and we were laughing and we were crying at these adventures of this young girl and in our world today, so that it's set in a period, but she manages to transcend just with simply being a story about long ago and far away. It really does connect to now.
And Annie, which opens on May 27th at Festival Theater, is directed and choreographed by Donna Fiore, who was the director and choreographer behind Something Rotten from last year, which I just mentioned. How do you think Donna's choreography will make the most both of this production, and how do you think this production makes the most of her choreography and direction?
Well, and she has invited in an orchestrator for dance numbers. So there's more choreography in this Annie than you'd see in other productions of Annie. And Donna's done a fantastic job. It's kinetic. It's just, it is so vibrant. And there are lots of, 9, 10, 11-year-olds in this production, Michael. They are amazing. They are so focused. They sing beautifully. They dance. They do aerials. I mean, you kind of think, I wasn't that together when I was 10. And you're just blown away by them. And Donna has made for a production which has got its feet solidly on the ground, but it is just kind of, it lifts the roof off the theater. So I saw a dress rehearsal about a week ago. It's now playing to the public. The response is huge. What she did on Something Rotten, and you're right, that was something never to be forgotten, I think is going to be rivaled here with what she's done with Annie.
And then lastly, the two that we've not talked about so far, the classics, Sense and Sensibility, which opens June 19th, and Dangerous Liaisons, which opens August 22nd, both at Festival Theater. Now, what I realize is that both of these plays are based on classic novels. Two very different definitions of classics, but both classic in their own right. What I'm curious is when it comes to translating a story from text to stage, which is more important to you? Which is my way of saying, please don't be on the fence. It makes for greater conversation if you commit to one. But which is more important to you? Loyalty to the text and to the world that's created by the novel, or loyalty to the audience in terms of if you have to bend meaning or text or use costume to augment something just to entertain the people that are actually in the seats, then you do what you must.
Well, look, it's theater. It's not a novel, right? And the novels unfold over many hundreds of pages, and you've got in the theater less than 3 hours. And so it has to work in the theater. So given a choice between those two things, it's gotta make sense now to this audience today. You want to hold on to the beating heart of the source material. And these are two pieces, one in the 18th century, one in the early 19th century, which look at women's roles in society and the battlefield that is society, both in terms of marriage, sexual fidelity. So they have a lot of connections. One is more biting in Dangerous Liaisons, and the other is sweeter in Sense and Sensibility. But they capture, things that we think, oh, well, that's not on a war front. But in a way, for these young women who, their only chance to have a decent life was to marry properly, and that could be sent sideways in so many ways, these are life and death stakes.
Mm.
And so both retellings, though, are very theatrical. They are not, it's not the same as reading the book. And especially Sense and Sensibility in this particular version has a real kind of tongue in cheek quality. It's delightful. It's got a lot of movement based work in it. The cast basically creates the whole world of the 18th century or 19th century in that case. And so I would say that squarely making theater that matters now to the audience and bought tickets and are sitting in the seats is more important than trying to recreate a literary experience. They can go and read the book the next day.
Fantastic. Before I let you go, I want to talk about, you know, in the under the view that this is your second last season with Stratford. Don't worry, I won't have you select a successor or anything like that. But I did want to get this perspective on your tenure that I think is probably very useful for the next person coming in. And a good way to sort of get that is in 2014, earlier in your tenure, the attendance for that season was 462,000 people. So almost half a million. That's incredible. And a lot of that had to do with the King Lear production that you staged in 2014, which was a blockbuster. Now in 2023, the attendance is 443,000. Yes, it's gone down in terms of numbers, but that's still near half a million, and that is incredibly significant. But you've also staged King Lear that same year in 2023. So it's like the same production, same artistic director, 10 years apart, and the numbers have gone down. So I think it's almost like a scientific experiment where you try to hold as much constant as possible and track audience behavior. I will note though that in 2023, there was a 35% increase from 2022. So
Yeah.
that puts it a little bit in perspective from in terms of pandemic rebound. What I'm curious about is, the 2024 numbers just came out and it's now at 430,000 people in terms of folks that showed up. These are numbers that you're seeing everywhere across the performing arts, across the visual arts. Artistically speaking, what do you think it's going to take, both at Stratford and in similarly operating houses across Canada, to get back to more or less those 2014 numbers? And do you feel that the public has a responsibility to show up? Which sounds like, a very obtuse thing to say because your job is to get people to show up. But how much more can you do that you think you're not already doing to get people to show up?
Thanks for that. So, there were some years there just before the pandemic where we exceeded 500,000 seats. I think 2018, for instance, and we were really ready to shoot the lights out. We were opening up a brand new theater in the Tom Patterson Theater in 2000, and a big playbill, 15 productions. Um, and then, life happened and the pandemic hit, and it has knocked the arts sideways, especially performing arts, because there was a year there where our attendance was zero. It was all online, and so building that has taken time. However, I think that what matters is not just the numbers, but also the quality of the experience. And over the time of since, 2014, 2013, we've introduced things like the forum, where you can go and immerse yourself in the world of the plays, get to meet the artists so that the experience of Stratford is richer and more involved. The productions that we're putting on, like Robert Lepage's Macbeth this year, I think will continue to build and attract people back to the theater for something that they can't get in Netflix. But it is true as well, Michael, that over the course from 2014 to now, the change in what we can do with our television sets, with what we can stream, the competition has become very much in our homes, and it's really easy to stay home now and get vast amounts of entertainment. What you can't get at home is the feeling of being in a room with hundreds of other people, laughing and enjoying and crying together and forming community together. That is something uniquely the festival and the festival theater, but all theater can do and has been doing for thousands of years. That will enable us over time to build back. The theater has survived many pandemics over many, many centuries. We will build back. We will build back because we help people understand, we help people laugh and find joy. And over time, we will put the pandemic very much in the rearview mirror.